So I've been thinking about something lately because it's really a lot to do with my life right now. Parenting and how I was raised versus how I'm choosing to raise my son. And I think it comes down to a very simple concept for me. Active parenting versus reactive parenting. I feel like a lot of my upbringing was very reactive. Unprocessed triggers and traumas in my parents were shifted onto us. And there's a huge part of it too that I think comes from Christianity and organized sort of religion, where it's operating out of fear. Because a lot of our traumas and triggers that cause us to react and to perhaps parent in a reactive way, for me, it usually comes out of a fear that I had as a child. You got to be quiet in public or you'll get in trouble. And so then I feel this intense need to keep my child quiet in public. Not because he needs to be quiet, but because it comes from, it's reacting to a trauma I have. Or an upbringing aspect that I dealt with. And so I'm keeping my child safe from my imaginary parents. And other people who will judge in the same way. So I choose every day, but it can be very difficult sometimes. I think the reactive parenting is still prevalent in a lot of ways. And I think that the reason I find it so damaging is that, first of all, I think I lived that life as a child. And also because you're putting onto a child something that he didn't do, and you're also projecting a fear onto him. So for instance, growing up, there was always this fear that we would become vain, because vanity was apparently this terrible, terrible thing. There was a fear that we would develop into sexual deviance. There were all of these fears related to the religious belief that we were raised with that basically inspired our parents to parent us in a way that was preemptive and reactive all at the same time. So in order to make sure we weren't vain, they never complimented us, they never told us we looked nice, I grew up thinking I was ugly, and that the only way that anyone was ever going to love me is if I was the sweetest, kindest, most meek, humble, self-sacrificial person in the world. And you would say, well, it's good to be meek and humble and self-sacrificial and loving and kind and meek. Yes, but it also sets you up to be a great victim for manipulative people. Because you think it's your job to do that just to be loved. You learn that you actually have to earn love. And the way that you earn love is by being a doormat, essentially. So I think that it's just as dangerous to be raised believing that vanity is such a terrible thing, that it's better if you actually insinuate or imply to your child that they have no looks whatsoever and that it's their job to be a doormat, to be loved. The same way that some children are raised believing that their looks are the only qualifying feature that they have. It's just as damaging, if not more so. So I think it's important to look at this as a parent, as a non-parent. If you're looking at your childhood, if you're raising children now and you're doing it different, or something doesn't sit right with you. For me, most of the time when it doesn't sit right, it's because I find myself reacting and parenting out of fear. I'm afraid that he's going to grow up to be vain, so I'm never going to show him the mirror. If he smiles at himself in the mirror, I'm going to make sure. I had a lady suggest to me the other day, she said, oh, he's so handsome. I said, thank you. And she said, now make sure anytime you ever tell him anything like that, that you have him hand you something, so that he learns to associate that word with giving. And I was thinking, okay. I see is that parents are absolutely petrified that their child will turn out to be some kind of a negative result if they don't seriously hit this hard and make sure that they instill in them the opposite of what they're afraid of. I don't want my child to grow up to be any kind of criminal, but being so afraid of that I parent in a way that is reactive to a fear of an outcome that is imaginary at this point is, I don't think, very useful. And if anything, it helps him believe that I'm so afraid that he has this ability and this tendency towards being a terrible, terrible person that I have to be so involved as a parent and I have to force to make sure that he turns out good. That basically tells him that I inherently believe that he's born evil and that the only way he's going to be good is if I force him to be. And that just goes back to a whole thing that I need to talk about sin nature and sin. He agrees. That's a whole nother ball game. But basically this also goes back to the same thing that I grew up with, was you believe that your children are born sinful. And there's nothing, literally I was taught, there's nothing you can do to be good enough. There's nothing you can do that's good. Anything you do is bad. The only things that are ever good is what God does through you. He's done. We'll save that for another time. See you guys.